definitely being prepared, being well-versed, asking a ton of questions, having some strong operations in order to make the process, even just down to the due diligence process. I had a colleague who had raised some capital years ago just say to me, like, listen, whenever you decide to raise money, just have all of your documents in a Dropbox. And that worked so much in my favor because when I got that first angel check that I was not expecting, all I had to do was send over a copy of, everything from the Dropbox link. It was already organized. So I didn't have to scramble. So there's that whole saying, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. I recommend that philosophy to sort of run the operations of your business so that you're ready for any opportunity.
All right, who are we speaking with today?
I'm Sherrell Dorsey, founder and CEO of The Plug and author of Upper Hand, The Future of Work for the Rest of Us.
Fantastic. Tell us about your new book.
So my book is all about how communities of color can start to create and navigate a strategy of getting into tech, and particularly in careers that are going to be the future of work. It is honestly a part memoir of my story and my journey into tech, coming from an inner city Seattle neighborhood, single parent household, and learning to code in high school, going on to internships at Microsoft from the ages of 14 to 18, and just really navigating the world of startups and eventually starting my own startup. And it gives a lot of the cheat code, a lot of the things that folks outside of the bubble may not always have access to. And so I put things in there like tech conferences run by folks of color and where they're located, how much they cost, all the way down to case studies on Black and Latinx-led entrepreneurs who also sort of started outside of tech, got into that space, and they're now creating platforms and opportunities for others learning how to break into tech. So it really is a guide for folks who are usually not part of this conversation. And the reason why I wrote this book, honestly, is because when I read tech books and blogs and listen to podcasts, there is rarely any dialogue or language that is befitting for folks who have never been given a resource or a guide at all. And I wanted this to be that guide, to be at the dinner table, at the house of worship, in the community centers, what have you, so that people don't feel lost and left out or left behind.
I love that. And then tell us about the title.
So Upper Hand, it took me a while to come up with the title for this book. I had a lot of like big word names and I had to circulate the title amongst friends. And the feedback I kept getting was like, okay, yeah, like that sounds like something that's going to be very research heavy and like, wow. I wanted to evoke something that felt powerful and abundant and felt like folks can take their destiny in their own hands and have the upper hand. And you'll read in the book about how so many communities of color got left behind in this conversation of getting into the tech space. I equate my experience growing up in Seattle, learning how to code in a storefront property in a predominantly Black community that was eventually gentrified as the Amazons and the Microsofts of the world expanded. And there's always this narrative of like being left behind. And I thought to myself, if we're talking about and shaping the next 10 to 20 years, we have to take the upper hand to make sure that we are locking in our future as the world continues to move quickly, as technology continues to evolve.
I love that. And when writing the book, what surprised you the most, or what did you learn when writing the book?
Oh my gosh, there were so many reflective moments, so many things I realized for myself personally. I had such great fortune of being part of organizations and even getting things like the Blacks at Microsoft Scholarship, down to how abnormal my experience had been for kids coming from the neighborhood I came from to go and like work at Microsoft and like have my own office at like 15 years old, and realizing like I had such a tremendous opportunity. And a lot of folks who came from very similar circumstances that I came from did not have that same level of extension, and how much it shaped my trajectory. I also got to dive into my grandfather's life. And it was the first time I found a through line of his story and mine. So my grandfather is originally from Birmingham, Alabama. And this man is 87 years old, has not been back to Alabama since he was 13, but for some reason, he is still the countryest man on the planet. You speak to him, he is a country man. And he moved to Detroit, so to the north, as most Black folks who were migrating between the 1900s and the 1970s to the north. Family migrated to Detroit. He got drafted to the Korean War, was there for 2 years, so gets back about 20 years old, and is trying to figure out his life. What's been so fascinating is that having these intentional conversations with my grandfather about his life were so eye-opening. And I'd realized how much I just did not know about him until I really started to get into this book and understand his story. And I really opened my entire book with his story. So he gets back from the Korean War, and there's like a knock at the door. He's trying to figure out his life. This guy comes to the door, as when salesmen used to come to the door and just knock and try to sell you something. So he represented a vocational electronics trade program. And my grandfather was like, why not? I got to make money, got to start helping to feed the family. And did this certificate program for 2 years at the Detroit Radio and Electronic Trade School. And that particular certificate got him a job at Boeing, sight unseen. He never interviewed. They were looking for workers. So he hops on the Greyhound bus with his 2 sandwiches in his brown paper bag, and he lands in downtown Seattle. He stays at the YMCA for $10 a day. And he eats French fries because he only had about $40, so he had to make that stretch. So he ate his French fries and he made $2.38 a day. And this was in the late 1950s, early 1960s. And that trajectory, him getting to Boeing, him being a Black man in Seattle when the Black population at that time was like less than 2%. Being able to purchase his first home, being able to use this opportunity to enter into the Black middle class. And then fast forward in the mid 90s, buying me and my cousins the first computers. Like I had to kind of go back to understanding the through line and how much of an influence, because he had this technical background on a very basic level, but how much it influenced every aspect of our lives. Like my grandfather had security, like streaming video cameras around his house in like the early 90s. Like this was not a thing. Now everyone's like down with Nest and all of this. He had all of that, like keypad entry into the garage. Just, he was just that person who had every latest gadget, and he essentially had a smart home before we understood that particular level of technology. And he had always been this technophile. And because of that, and because he wanted us to have access to technology, he bought all of our CD-ROMs. Every time me and my cousin would have to go to his house, we had to sit and do Mavis Beacon. I don't know if you remember the Mavis Beacon software, where it was a Black woman software program, or she was at least a Black woman on the software, and she taught you how to type. And she told you when you missed a key or a button. That's when you used to have to like actually go learn how to type. He would make us sit and do those programs like every single time we went to his house. So I had to kind of backtrack through my memories of childhood and then spend time just having conversations with him. Well, why did you go to Seattle in the first place? And he's like, well, got a job at Boeing. I also got a job offer in Jacksonville, but they were rioting. They had some race riots, so I didn't go there. And so it was like, if they didn't have riots, we would have been in Jacksonville. So it's such an interesting through line of my grandfather really setting the stage for the influence of technology, especially for someone who got a vocational certificate, and took that and built a life for his family.
Wow, an amazing story. Two follow-up questions. Did he maintain his career at Boeing, and is he aware that he's the topic of the book?
So yes and no. So he did maintain his career for about 8 years, and then he went to King TV and served as a cameraman. And he retired from King TV. But even though he retired from King TV, he was our resident handyman, fix-it, electrician, all of those things. So when he retired from his regular job, he was Mr. I have to create a robot arm for my science fair. So you're going to have to help me with this. So he was the man that helped us build every single thing for every science project or whatever random thing that we wanted to create. What was the other part of your question? Oh, the topic of the book. So I had always been interviewing my grandfather probably my entire life. Like I tell people, like I was always asking him a series of questions because I always thought he was very old. He's been retired. I want to say he was probably retired almost my whole life. And I just always remember him being very old, but he had this incredible like life that would just come out at random times. Like we'd have a conversation about how his dad had to change his name because his mom wanted to name him something else. And so he would come downstairs with his birth certificate, and it's a birth certificate from a colored hospital. And you're realizing like, oh, you were born in a colored hospital. Like you have to take a pause as he's trying to show you how, look, my dad scratched my name, the name that my mother tried to name me out. And we're like, your original birth certificate, you were born in a colored hospital. And so there's just all these fascinating things of you were in the war, you hopped on the bus to Seattle. Like, so every time we would get together for like family gatherings, I decided to just start recording conversations. Number one, because he's funny. And number two, because, as your family gets older and people continue, we all live all over the place at this point, being together gives you an opportunity to hear the stories and to hear people's voices and to see their mannerisms in a way that, we 30, 40 years ago, you didn't have that same level of technology at the same capacity. So as I'm like trying to just document family and stories, he would just have these interesting zingers about his life. And as I started to think about how I wanted to kick the book off, I would call him and record our conversations, and I'd have to ask for clarification on things. So he knows that I've spent a lot of time asking him a bunch of questions. He's not aware yet that I've dedicated this book to him. And so as my book comes out, I'll be heading to Seattle, giving him a copy so that he can see that this book is, was for him. And what's most significant about that, Muema, is that there's a lot of folks who can say, they come from civil rights leaders or, politicians or what have you. And it's like, my grandfather didn't have any titles. He didn't have any notoriety. He was a man that went to work, that supported his family, and showed up as an incredible grandfather. And he's 87 years old now. And I just wanted him to get his flowers and to understand how much of an influence he had been in driving us towards this idea of creating something out of nothing through technology. So I'm excited to kind of surprise him on a deeper level because he knows that I just ask him a bunch of questions, but that's not even unusual for me for the most part.
Wow. I love it. I love it. And then last question on the book, and then we'll pivot to being a founder and an angel. What do you hope readers will take away from reading this book?
My hope is that it grounds a conversation in who we decide genius is. I think that I wanted to demonstrate that the communities that I came out of were so significant that before I even started working at Microsoft, I was working at the dance studio in the hair salon, and that those people were incubators for early internships for kids like me and teenagers, not only giving us something to do to like stay off the street and not get into trouble, but to earn money, to learn professionalism, to learn operations and business. Those were my early days of learning excellence in operations, was working for, two women, small businesses who paid me very well to assist in their business. And then of course I went to Microsoft. So I wanted to open it up with my own personal anecdotes on that level, because again, coming from where I come from in Rainier Beach in Seattle, South Seattle, those were environments that were never seen as like innovative or genius. And I wanted to redefine that. I also hope, my hope as well is, again, for those who are out of the boat, who haven't yet even know that the boat exists. And I say that, and I use that analogy primarily because I feel like in this tech space, we have codified language and made a lot of this space inaccessible. And we haven't passed down enough to the outer corners that typically don't go to the schools or live in the neighborhoods that get the kind of access that innovation provides. And that's why I sort of packed this book with references, with word banks, with case studies, with things that are really accessible. And I tell this story in the book of sitting in the bottom of a church basement in Charlotte, North Carolina, on a workforce development panel. And there was a woman, Miss Smith, who was an older lady. She was sitting there with her grandson. And as the panel kind of came to a close, and the Q&A period started, she's like, listen, I'm raising my grandson. I know that he needs to be in this space. He's about to graduate from high school. I have no idea how to help him. Maybe he's not going to college, but he needs to get into this space. Like, y'all are talking about 3D printers and all of these things. And I don't know where to start. So as much as this book, of course, was a reflection of my adoration for my grandfather, it also was, there aren't folks in this space around technology who are speaking to Miss Smith as though she has the desire to help the next generation move forward. So for me, this is the book that you can take, to your family, reunion. You can sit with at the dinner table. I talk about not knowing how to negotiate my salary when I worked for a major startup, because I didn't necessarily have anyone in my family who worked for a company like I had, or had negotiated stock options, or knew about signing bonuses. And so the way that we rob people of their mobility and their economic mobility is we keep information locked in. And not everyone is going to be reading the kind of tech, nerdy blogs we're reading, right? Not everyone's going to be part of tech Twitter or Black tech Twitter or Latinx Twitter, or what have you, where they are sharing information. So this book, is reaching those of us who are still locked out of information.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. So let's pivot. Since this is the Angel Connect, where we bridge the gap between founders and investors, you've been on both sides of the table. So let's talk about being a founder and fundraising. First, tell everybody about your startup.
So I run The Plug, and we started off as a daily tech newsletter back in 2016. I had been working full time and just kind of creating something around deeper journalism that covered Black innovation beyond just Black in tech, and more so of what are we building, how are we building it, who are the investors, what are the trends that we're seeing as more Black and brown people get access to funding and capital, and are able to help move the needle on, again, who gets to show up in this space of technology. Today, The Plug truly serves as a business intelligence platform, redefining the way that we're covering Black tech startups, fund managers, economic and innovation hubs, specifically in communities of color.
I love that. So fundraising. Tell us about your journey of fundraising. Specifically, what was your biggest challenge in fundraising? And then what was your experience dealing with angel investors? Because I also want this to be an educational experience for people to see, you know, feedback from the other side of the table. You know, were they a-holes? Were they receptive? Did they actually look at your deck? Did they actually give you feedback? You know, that kind of stuff.
I think I'm a little unique, honestly, because as a journalist in tech, I kind of had a network built up of investors that I knew that I could kind of go to, number one, to get feedback on my deck, because I never built one. I had built my company very revenue first focus. And at the time when I was in J school, journalism school, kind of building my company out, all of the media players were losing lots of money. Venture was not trying to touch media. So I never thought that was an option. I was like, let me go subscription, let me go content licensing. I think I had just done a deal with Vice, and let me just go after advertising revenue. So my relationship with VCs at that time had been on the other side of the table of like me interviewing them. So when I was able to at least approach a couple of folk, specifically just to look at my deck, and point me in the direction of folks who were starting to make investments into media-based companies, it was I will say, like, the space could be very generous, right? It is, hey, do you have time to look at my deck? I'll give you feedback. Now, when I went to start to actually go to raise money, came through referrals. So I was referred to some folks, some investors, through other investors that I knew. And I won't say that it was necessarily hostile or anything like that. I think that there might have been some instances of folks who wanted me to either drastically kind of change my business. They didn't understand it. I think at one point, we were being compared to other Black media players, even though we did fundamentally different things. So that was kind of one of the challenges of, oh, there's only so many people that can build in this space that look like me, versus like, this is a completely different business. So that got to be very annoying, because I'm like, but did you even read my deck? Did you even look at our work? Did you see the differentiation there? Did you see that the plan and the vision is very different? So that got to be very annoying. We also got feedback around how other larger media players can come in and do what we're doing. And I'm like, but they haven't. So, and again, I mean, I think there was a level of frustration of lack of vision in some cases, that drastically changed, maybe just a few short years later, when I actually accidentally ended up raising money, and getting an angel investor, just by nature of a conversation that I was having with a mutual contact about what I was building. And they just offered. They're like, I love this idea. Let me, I would love to, write you a check. And I was like, oh, okay. And I wasn't expecting it at all, because all of the kind of other experiences had been, maybe larger folks who weren't really investing at my level, at that time. And so to get that, and to have someone who was a complete stranger, someone I had never been on my radar, it was a very different experience. It was very empowering, for sure. And then also a little scary, as a first time founder, real founder. I can't include some of the businesses I started when I was a teenager, but as a first time real founder, where, wow, this person is giving me money and believes in me, and I need to make this a successful business. It really motivates you in a very different kind of way. And then as I started to raise some additional capital, I kind of automatically looked for what was happening in my lane. There was more investment starting to pop up in the journalism space, particularly from foundations. I will say one thing that has really, really helped me was having a very public profile across social media. Kind of that idea of doing your work in public, people seeing the notoriety of what you're bringing to the table, a lot of the work of me and my team going viral, and building up that sense of credibility, and having done it with, again, kind of very few resources, but still being able to make an impact, and people starting to really, truly understand our story. That made things a little bit easier, kind of that next go round of more of a pre-seed raising. And so now part of our goal as we go into a potential seed round is to really look for those players that are looking to invest in sort of next gen media, specifically that is niche, kind of culture focused, in that kind of trade / business intelligence space versus more consumer media or consumer based media. And the great thing now is, having done a little bit of raising, the refinement of a lot of our personal kind of vision and mission, a little bit more sophistication around how we understand our customers and our users and things like that. So it's a very long-winded answer. However, this has just been my process. And now as we go into another process, it's going to be I think probably a very different answer. And I think I will say this before I turn it back your way, is, it can always be very, very scary, I think, in terms of not knowing how or whether, an investor is going to like your idea, or you hear so many horror stories. I think especially like being a Black woman in this space, you're kind of almost going in with a negative viewpoint. So you have to kind of shift that. I did have one investor that I spoke with ask for a bunch of things. And I had to, and some advice I had gotten from a colleague was like, there are some investors that will ask you for a ton of things, kind of take you to the motions, but they never have a plan to invest. So I kind of had to ask some clarifying questions as they were starting to ask for a lot of things and talk about like, yeah, we want to go through this process and blah, 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 blah. And, I had to ask questions about like, well, did you finish raising fund 2? How many companies do you think you're going to be investing in this year? And as like they started to kind of respond to some of the questions that I was asking, it was very clear that they were not interested in investing. And so I kind of had to graciously just, kind of decline a lot of that like busy work, because I needed to kind of hyper focus on the people who were actually interested in investing. And so I think it's always a song and dance, because at the end of the day, you're still, dealing with people. But, my experience had been very nuanced, but at the same time, like I also got to walk into some spaces with a reputation. So even if people weren't going to invest or they felt like this doesn't fit for us, they were still very gracious about it. So that's been my experience.
No, thank you for sharing that. I think that'll help a lot of people as they start their fundraising journey. Now let's talk about the other side. You're also an angel investor. Tell us about your first angel investment and what was that experience like?
Oh, that's such a great question. Honestly, my first, my first angel investment, my first and actually only, I'm an investor just in kind of general from a stocks and retirement kind of space. I don't discount those experiences either, but I got an opportunity, through, again, context, colleagues, what have you. And, for me, to do a first kind of like angel check is can be pretty daunting, because you're like, oh, I've never written a check this big for someone that, is building something that may or may not work out. And so getting to that level of comfortability is definitely something that is going to, I think, grow over time. Doing due diligence on someone else, and kind of trusting and believing that, they're going to win, is definitely a different posture kind of from the other side of the table. I wish it was a more complicated process. It was literally a wire, after kind of evaluating the opportunity and speaking to a couple of, not just the founders, but to some other investors, to some advisors, really doing a bit of research on the space as well. And also just knowing like it kind of still is a gamble at the end of the day. But you're trying to make the most well-informed decision. And I hope as, my kind of experience grows, I can continue to support other, founders who are building something really incredible. And, in that, in those investments to me are super important. It's super important for me to get into the habit of also making investments in other companies, but particularly when I look at even my family infrastructure and I look at helping to support family members that actually want to start companies. I didn't necessarily have that support in starting a business my first go round. And so as I'm having closer conversations with family members, we're even, working on some investment projects now, not necessarily related to the tech space, but more around like real estate and things like that. And I think each and every time there's like this excitement around the possibilities for sure, but there's a lot of back work. There's a lot of of a learning curve. So having resources like this podcast at your disposal to really learn this process and to get comfortable and just make it a habit, and to realize in some cases, like money is not emotional at all. It shouldn't be emotional, even though sometimes some of us come from backgrounds where it is an emotional experience, but looking at it as a tool. And I remember Mac Conwell from Rare Breed. He's another really good friend who has looked at my deck before and gave me great feedback and has coached me. I remember him telling me that, like, listen, like money is a tool, like don't be afraid of it. And so I try to take that into my thinking, or at least the development of my thinking of angel investing, especially in the future, as I would like to continue to build out a portfolio for myself.
No, thank you so much. And last question, what advice, if any, do you have for either founders looking to raise and or people thinking about starting angel investing?
I think being prepared is still very important. I think a lot of times we can talk about what's happening on the other side for maybe people who don't have the same background. I'm Black and I'm female, and the reality is sometimes the opportunities look very different for us. I try not to say that this hinders me. It's just a reality that I have to like walk into the room in a very different kind of way. And so part of that is ensuring that I am well versed in who I'm approaching and what they invest in. I really don't try to approach a bunch of strangers. I think, especially in what I'm building, I have to connect with people and connect with investors, particularly who have already shown an interest in what I'm doing. I've had the most success with people who have already bought in to what I'm building, especially at this stage in my business. And so definitely being prepared, being well versed, asking a ton of questions, having some strong operations in order to make the process, even just down to the due diligence process. I had a colleague who had raised some capital years ago just say to me, like, listen, whenever you decide to raise money, just have all of your documents in a Dropbox. And that worked so much in my favor, because when I got that first angel check that I was not expecting, all I had to do was send over a copy of, everything from the Dropbox link. It was already organized, so I didn't have to scramble. So there's that whole saying, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. I recommend that philosophy to sort of run the operations of your business so that you're ready for any opportunity. And I also think that it is totally fine to continue to tap the investor as well for support, especially when you're stuck. I think it's easy to sometimes, get to a place where you feel like, I don't want my investor to be concerned that I'm not going to be able to take this company to the next level when you're having an issue. And sometimes your investor is going to be your best advocate and your best ally to help you get over the hump. And I really had to learn that, that these folks want to see me win at the end of the day. So whether I'm texting, tweeting, or in my company update, which again, like also sharing just general company updates. Obviously a lot of investors, a lot of angel investors have a multitude of portfolio companies that they've invested in. So they're busy, but at least once a month, if you see my name in your inbox, you'll know that, okay, well, Sherrell is actively working on the business. Here are the updates. Here are the new hires. Here's the new deal that they just struck, or what have you. And you get to keep that line of communication. Just like any relationship, you have to keep investing in it. You have to keep, the lines of communication open, so that if you need to come back for resources, and resources can be even more than just money. you have that kind of rapport that's already built up. And on the other side of that, from an angel investing or an investing perspective, I think there has to really be an understanding of, listen, just like folks invested in you and believe in you, you have to take that same approach and not be afraid of the money issue or being too emotionally attached to the money, but more so of the opportunity and being able to seek out those opportunities for sure. And being in environments where people will pass you deals. At least once a week, people are reaching out to me like, hey, I have this great deal. And now I don't have the portfolio, the net worth to invest in all of these deals. But being offered, being asked, I think is also a reflection of how I show up in this space and who I'm connected to, and the fact that they're thinking like, oh, Sherrell would be very interested in investing in this. So, I think, overall, in kind of both scenarios, this is still a people business at the end of the day, and relationships matter. And you can cultivate those relationships if you're not someone who has already had access to deep networks in that capacity. You can cultivate those relationships in associations, fellowships, accelerator programs. There's so many things that exist that will help you at least start to broaden your network and to find those people that you can start to pitch to, or at least like get those warm introductions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Why don't you show everybody the book one more time? So Upper Hand, The Future of Work for the Rest of Us, available on Amazon today.
Yes, absolutely. And Barnes and Nobles.